rising in your chest when someone crosses a line, the surge that tightens your jaw and floods your bloodstream with fire, the force that makes your hands clench and your vision narrow. That force is the same energy that spins galaxies. Same substance, different intensity. What I'm laying out tonight will reframe everything you've been taught about this emotion. If you were raised to believe anger is sinful, if you've spent years in therapy trying to manage it, if you've been told that spiritual people don't get angry, tension will arise. Good. That tension marks the exact point where conditioning starts to dissolve under examination. We've made videos on sexual energy, on the awakening force in the spine, on the darkness within you as divine force. This goes into territory even more taboo, because while some spiritual paths acknowledge sexuality as sacred, anger remains the emotion that spiritual systems permit total rejection of. It's the last fire that seekers are allowed to extinguish entirely. By the time we're done, you'll understand exactly why anger proves you're divine, how the mechanism of transmutation works at the energetic level, and you'll have a practice you can use tonight to convert this raw force into fuel for awakening. No belief required. Just willingness to feel what's actually happening in your body when this energy moves. To keep this accessible, I'll use English translations for the concepts we're working with, keeping technical terms minimal. The precision matters, but the language barrier shouldn't block understanding. What you're getting is technology. Precise methods for working with the most volatile energy available in a human nervous system. Let's begin. Feel into your body right now, the last time genuine anger moved through you. Not irritation, not frustration, real anger. The kind that makes your heart pound, that flushes heat through your face and neck, that creates pressure behind your eyes. Notice where you felt it, probably the solar plexus first, that bundle of nerves just below your sternum, then radiating outward, up into your chest, down into your gut, through your arms into your fists. That sensation you're recalling is energy. Actual energy, measurable in temperature changes, blood pressure shifts, hormonal cascades. Adrenaline floods the system, cortisol spikes. The body prepares for action. This is the fight response, the oldest survival mechanism in your nervous system, the force that kept your ancestors alive when threats appeared. But the Tantric tradition saw something deeper. But they recognized that this energy, this heat, this upward rushing force, it shares the exact energetic signature of the serpent power that lives coiled at the base of the spine. When that force awakens, it rises with heat, with intensity, with power that can feel overwhelming. Anger produces the same pattern. Rising, heating, pressurizing, seeking release. This is the first recognition. Anger and the awakening force are the same energy in different contexts. One occurs when an external trigger activates the survival response. The other occurs when internal practices awaken the dormant life force. But the energy itself, the divine feminine power that creates and destroys worlds, identical. When you feel anger, you're feeling God. Not God as benevolent grandfather in the sky, God as raw, creative, destructive force, the fire that both forges and consumes, the power that dismantles what no longer serves and creates space for what needs to emerge. This is the dark goddess energy, the wrathful face of the divine that dissolves obstacles through sheer intensity. And it lives in you, moves through you, has been moving through you since your first cry of protest as an infant, since your first tantrum as a toddler, since every moment in your life when something rose up in you and demanded, no, this stops, this changes, this boundary will not be crossed. That force is divine, and its presence in you proves what you are. 3 options exist when anger arises. Every human being chooses one of these paths, usually unconsciously, usually based on conditioning absorbed before the age of 7. The first option is suppression. You feel the heat rising, and you push it down. You tighten your jaw, Swallow the words, force the energy back into your belly where it curdles. Spiritual paths often prescribe this approach. Be peaceful, rise above it. Don't let them get to you. Spiritual people don't get angry. Problem with suppression is physics. Energy cannot be destroyed. When you push anger down, it doesn't disappear. It gets stored. In your muscles, creating chronic tension patterns. In your organs, contributing to inflammation and disease. In your unconscious, where it festers and grows, waiting for moments of weakness when it can erupt with twice the force you originally felt. Suppressed anger becomes resentment, becomes passive aggression, becomes depression, which is often anger turned inward, becomes physical ailments as the body tries to express what the mind refuses to acknowledge. Suppression creates shadow. The angrier you pretend not to be, the larger the reservoir of unexpressed rage building beneath your conscious awareness. We made a video on shadow work, on darkness as divine. This is one of the primary sources of shadow material. Every time you told yourself you shouldn't be angry, every time you performed calm while fury churned in your gut, every time you smiled while wanting to scream, you added to the shadow. And shadow material doesn't stay buried forever. It leaks out in dreams, in slips of tongue, in moments when you snap at someone who didn't deserve it because you've been swallowing rage for weeks. If you've spent years suppressing anger, you're carrying a substantial energetic debt. That energy is waiting to be addressed. The practice I'll give you tonight can help, but understand that years of suppression take time to clear. Patience matters here. The second option is expression. You feel the heat rising and you let it rip. You say the harsh words. You raise your voice. You throw the object. You let your body move the way anger wants it to move, violently and without restraint. This is what anger seems to want. The energy seeks release, and expression provides it. There's momentary relief in screaming, in hitting something, in letting the volcano erupt. Some therapeutic approaches encourage this. Hit the pillow. Scream into the void. Get it out. The problem with expression is consequence. When you act from anger, you create karma. The words you speak in rage cannot be unspoken. The relationships damaged by your outbursts don't automatically heal when you calm down. The actions taken in fury often require years to repair. And the deeper problem is reinforcement. Expression strengthens the pattern. Every time you express anger in the same way, you deepen the neural pathway that leads from trigger to reaction. You become more reactive, not less. The threshold for explosion lowers. The fuse shortens. You train yourself to go from zero to fury faster and faster until the slightest provocation sets you off. Expression also misses what the energy is actually for. Directing the force outward toward the apparent cause of your anger wastes it. You achieve temporary relief while depleting the very power that could be used for transformation. Yelling at someone might feel satisfying for 30 seconds. That same energy redirected could pierce through lifetimes of conditioning. The third option is transmutation. You feel the heat rising and you catch it. You don't push it down. You don't let it rip outward. You take conscious control of the energy and redirect it up through the central channel of the subtle body into the higher centers where it can be refined, where raw power becomes spiritual heat, where the fire that destroys becomes the fire that illuminates. This is the tantric path with anger, the same path applied to sexual energy, to fear, to all the so-called negative emotions that other spiritual systems reject. Nothing gets suppressed. Nothing gets wasted through unconscious expression. Everything gets used. When anger is transmuted, it becomes spiritual heat. The fire that burns away karmic residue, that melts frozen patterns in the subtle body, that accelerates awakening. The very intensity that makes anger dangerous also makes it powerful. Redirect that power skillfully, and you have rocket fuel for transformation. This requires catching the energy at its ignition point, before it becomes words, before it becomes action. At the moment when heat first arises in the solar plexus, when the fire is just beginning to build, that's your window. Miss it, and the energy takes over, moving through its habitual pattern toward suppression or expression. Catch it, and you can direct it consciously. If any of this is landing, if you're starting to see your own anger differently, drop a comment letting us know which of the three options you default to. Suppression, expression, or have you already been experimenting with transmutation? Your answer helps us understand what aspects of this work matter most to you. And if this is your first video on this channel, know that we go deep into these topics regularly. Subscribing means you won't miss the continuation of this exploration. The ignition point requires precise understanding. Anger doesn't begin in your mind. That's a crucial recognition. Thoughts about why you're angry, stories about what they did, justifications for your reaction, all of that comes later. The energy ignites first, in the body, before a single thought forms. This is why trying to think your way out of anger rarely works. By the time you're telling yourself to calm down, the fire is already blazing. You're trying to reason with a forest fire using gentle suggestions. The energy doesn't care about your thoughts. It's already mobilized, already running its program, already preparing your body to fight. The ignition point exists in the gap between stimulus and energetic response. Something happens in the external world, or even in your own mind, that triggers the anger pattern. A fraction of a second later, before conscious thought engages, the body begins to respond. Adrenaline releases, blood pressure shifts, muscles tense, heat builds at the solar plexus. That fraction of a second is where transmutation becomes possible. With practice, you can stretch that gap, make it wider, create enough space to intervene before the habitual pattern completes itself. The solar plexus, the power center located behind the navel, is central to this process. This wheel of energy governs personal power, will, and transformation. Its element is fire. When anger arises, energy concentrates here intensely, creating pressure that seeks release. In someone without training, that pressure finds its outlet through the most available channel, usually the throat. Angry words spill out because the fire at the power center pushes upward and exits through whatever opening presents itself. Or the pressure moves into the arms and hands, creating the urge to strike, to throw, to grab. The energy is seeking expression, and it will find it one way or another. The Tantric approach works with this natural upward movement, but redirects it through the central channel rather than letting it spill out the front of the body. Instead of exiting through throat or hands, the fire is directed up the spine, through the higher centers where it can be refined into subtler forms of energy. This is the same mechanism used to work with sexual energy. The force that would normally discharge through the genitals gets redirected up the spine through breath, visualization, and muscular locks. Anger works identically. The force that would normally discharge through speech or action gets redirected up the spine through the same methods. The difference is intensity. Sexual energy builds gradually, giving you time to work with it. Anger explodes suddenly, demanding faster response. This is why catching the ignition point matters so much. You need to act in the first few seconds before the full cascade activates. Consider what the Tantric traditions actually claimed about this force. In the Vajrayana lineages, particularly the Kagyu transmission, practitioners worked directly with what they called the 5 poisons. Anger was one of these, along with desire, ignorance, pride, and jealousy. The teaching held that each poison, when transmuted, becomes a wisdom. Anger specifically becomes mirror-like wisdom, the clear, undistorted reflection of reality as it actually is. The practitioners who developed these methods claimed direct experience of the transformation. When anger's energy is redirected and refined, it produces clarity so sharp it cuts through illusion like a blade. The same force that makes you want to destroy something becomes the force that destroys ignorance, that slices through the veils obscuring your true nature. Naropa, the 11th century master who codified the 6 yogas, worked extensively with this transformation. His own awakening included periods of intense rage. He didn't suppress them. He used them. The fire became fuel. His teacher Tilopa was notorious for provoking anger in students deliberately. He'd insult them, strike them, create conditions designed to trigger their rage, then watch to see what they did with the energy. Could they catch it? Could they redirect it? Or would they lose themselves in the reaction? This was a test and a teaching simultaneously. The master creating pressure to see if the student had developed the capacity to transmute under fire. The Tamil Siddhar tradition, those 18 perfected beings who achieved extraordinary states through tantric practice, also worked directly with anger. Their alchemical understanding held that the internal fire, what they called the digestive fire at the navel, was the same fire that could be intensified through anger and used for transformation. When rage arose, it was fuel added to the inner furnace. The question was always direction. Would the fire burn outward, destroying relationships and creating karma? Or would it burn upward, refining the practitioner's consciousness? Sivavakiyar, one of the 18, was famous for his irreverence and his rage against hypocrisy. He thundered against the pretense of the religious establishment, against empty ritual, against those who mouthed sacred words while living unconsciously. His anger was visible and fierce, but it was transmuted anger, directed upward into wisdom rather than sideways into petty conflict. He used the fire to illuminate truth, not to burn adversaries. The wrathful deities of the Tibetan tradition represent this same understanding, made visual. Mahakala with skulls around his neck, Vajrayana with his dagger of transformation, Palden Lamo riding across a sea of blood. These are enlightened beings appearing in terrifying form. Their wrath is not the wrath of ego seeking revenge. It's the wrath of awakening, destroying what obstructs awakening. When a practitioner visualizes these deities, when they identify with Mahakala's fierce expression or Vajrayana's piercing gaze, they're learning to hold anger in a particular way, to let it flow without letting it possess, to embody intensity without losing awareness. The wrathful deity practices train the nervous system to contain forces that would ordinarily overwhelm it. The force itself is neutral, even divine. The question is always consciousness. Are you aware enough to catch the fire when it ignites? Do you have the training to redirect it before it burns what you don't want burned? If you're following this closely, if you're recognizing your own relationship with anger in what I'm describing, let us know what's landing in the comments. What aspects of your anger have you tried to suppress? What has expression cost you? Your engagement helps guide the work we're creating. And hitting like on this video genuinely helps others find teachings that might shift how they relate to their own fire. The mechanics require practical understanding. When anger arises, blood vessels dilate in certain areas and constrict in others. The face flushes because blood is moving to the surface. The extremities may feel cold because blood is being redirected to core muscles needed for fighting. The breath becomes shallow and rapid, feeding oxygen to a system preparing for physical conflict. The heart rate accelerates. Muscles tighten, particularly in the jaw, shoulders, and hands. This is the physiology of preparation for combat. Your body doesn't know the difference between a genuine physical threat and someone insulting you on the internet. It mobilizes the same response either way. The Tantric approach works with this physiology rather than against it. Instead of trying to calm the body down through willpower, which rarely works, you redirect where the energy is flowing. The body has already mobilized. Fine. Use what's mobilized. The 3 primary tools are breath, locks, and visualization. Each serves a specific function in the transmutation process. Breath controls the direction of energy flow. When anger arises, the natural tendency is to breathe high in the chest, rapidly shallowly. This feeds the fight response. To transmute, you need to shift the breath pattern, not by suppressing the intensity, that's just suppression with extra steps, but by directing it. The technique is forceful exhalation through the nose while drawing the belly in sharply. This is skull-shining breath, though in the anger transmutation context you're using it differently than in a standard breathing practice. The sharp exhale creates upward movement of energy in the central channel. You're essentially pumping the fire up the spine instead of letting it spill out the front of the body. The multiple rapid exhales, driven by the abdominal muscles, create a pumping action that moves energy from the solar plexus up toward the higher centers. The intensity of anger actually helps here. You have more energy to move than you would in a calm state. The locks, what the yoga traditions call bandhas, seal the energy and prevent it from escaping through the usual exits. The root lock is the most important for anger transmutation. This is a contraction of the pelvic floor muscles, lifting upward and inward. It seals the base of the central channel, preventing energy from draining downward. When anger arises, engaging the root lock creates a container. The fire can't escape downward. The breath work is pushing it upward. The energy has nowhere to go except through the central channel toward the crown. Visualization guides the process. You're working with subtle energy that responds to mental direction. The visualization is fire ascending the spine. Red gold flame, starting at the solar plexus where the anger ignited, rising through the heart center, through the throat, up to the third eye and crown. You see the fire moving upward with each pumping exhale. You feel the heat rising through the core of your body. The same amount of energy that would have come out as screaming or violence is now fueling an internal transformation. Tonight's practice brings these elements together. This works best when anger is actually present, when you have real fire to work with. You can practice the technique when calm to learn the mechanics. But the real application happens in the moment when rage starts to rise. First, recognition. You must catch the anger at its ignition point, or as close to it as possible. The sensation will likely begin at your solar plexus. Heat, pressure, tightening. You might notice your jaw clenching, your hands making fists, your breathing becoming shallow and rapid. These are the signals. Earlier you catch them, the more energy you have to work with before it gets locked into habitual patterns. When you notice anger arising, stop. Physically stop whatever you were doing or about to do. Don't speak. Don't act. Don't engage with whoever triggered you. Just stop. This is the most difficult part. The energy is demanding expression, and you're refusing to give it the usual outlet. Stand if possible. Feet hip-width apart, knees slightly bent. This grounds you while allowing energy to move. If you can't stand, sitting is fine, but keep your spine straight. The central channel needs to be open for energy to rise. Engage the root lock. Contract the pelvic floor, lifting inward and upward. Hold this throughout the practice. This seals the base, preventing energy from escaping downward. Begin the pumping breath. Sharp exhales through the nose, driven by the abdominal muscles snapping inward. The inhale happens naturally, almost passively, between exhales. You're not emphasizing the inhale at all, only the forceful exhale. Start slowly if this is new to you. 1 exhale per second or even slower. As you become familiar with the technique, you can increase the pace to 2 or even 3 exhales per second. But precision matters more than speed. Each exhale should create an upward pumping sensation at the navel. Add the visualization. See the fire. Red gold flame at your solar plexus. The exact location where the anger ignited. With each pumping exhale, visualize that fire being pushed upward through your central channel. rises through your heart center, through your throat, up through the center of your skull, toward your crown. Feel the heat rising. This is the somatic experience, the body sensations that accompany the visualization. The fire is moving up your spine. You can feel it, heat in the core of your body, pressure rising, intensity moving from belly to chest to head. Continue for 30 to 60 pumping breaths, or until you feel the energy has shifted, until the fire has risen from the solar plexus into the higher centers. The anger may still be present, but its location will have changed. Instead of heat concentrated in the belly and trying to explode outward, you'll feel intensity in the head, behind the eyes, at the crown. When you feel the energy has risen, pause. Take a deep breath in through the nose. Hold briefly at the top of the inhale, feeling the energy suspended at the crown. Then exhale slowly, letting the refined energy settle throughout your whole system. Remain still for a few moments. Observe what's different. The intensity may still be present, but it's transmuted intensity. Clarity, power, focused awareness. The fire that was threatening to burn has become the fire that illuminates. Only now do you act. If action is still needed in the situation that triggered you, you can take it from this state. But you'll find the quality of action has changed. You're responding from transmuted power, clear, direct, potent, but not destructive. Integration requires ongoing practice. Tonight's method works for acute anger, for the moments when the fire is already rising. But the deeper work involves training the nervous system to transmute habitually, so that the ignition to transmutation pathway becomes automatic. This takes time, months of practice, maybe years, depending on how deep your habitual patterns run. If you've spent decades suppressing or expressing anger in the same ways, those neural pathways are deeply grooved. You're creating new pathways, new options. That requires repetition. 40 days is a traditional minimum in the Tantric systems for installing new patterns. If you commit to using this technique every time anger arises for 40 consecutive days, you'll notice a shift. The window at the ignition point will widen. You'll catch the fire earlier before it gathers momentum. The technique will become more natural, requiring less conscious effort. But understand what you're training. You're training yourself to feel anger completely while directing its energy consciously. The fire still burns. You're just choosing what it burns. Some triggers will still be overwhelming. When the anger comes too fast, when the intensity exceeds your current capacity, you may not catch it in time. You'll slip back into old patterns. It means you've identified where more training is needed. Each failure is information. What triggered you? What was the specific stimulus that bypassed your awareness? How can you become more sensitive to that particular ignition point? The practice develops through examining exactly where it breaks down. The deeper recognition emerges from sustained practice. When you've worked with anger long enough, when you felt it arise and transmuted it enough times, something shifts in your relationship to the emotion itself. You stop fearing it. This is substantial. Fear of one's own anger is pervasive. Those who suppressed learned to fear the feeling because of what it might do if released. Those who expressed learned to fear the consequences of their outbursts. Either way, anger became something to avoid, control, manage. When transmutation becomes available, the fear dissolves. Anger is no longer threatening because you know what to do with it. You have the technology. The fire can come as hot as it wants, and you can direct it upward. It becomes fuel, not threat. In that state, something even more profound can be noticed. The anger itself, the raw energy before it gets directed anywhere, is conscious. It's aware. It's part of the same consciousness that's listening to these words through your ears right now. Anger is God moving. Literally, the The energy that rises in your body when boundaries are violated is divine energy, consciousness itself, appearing as heat and pressure and the urge to act. When you feel anger without fear, without the need to suppress or express, you can actually examine what's there. You can feel the fire moving without getting burned by it, without burning others with it. And in that examination, you discover that the energy is the same energy that pulses through everything. The force that makes stars burn, the force that drives cellular division, the force that pushes life to evolve, to grow, to transform. All of it is the same consciousness, expressing through infinite forms, including the form of anger rising in a human body. This is the proof, not intellectual proof, though that can be constructed. Experiential proof. When you feel the fire in your own belly and recognize it as divine power, you know what you are, because the energy itself reveals its nature when you stop running from it. Boundaries become clearer, not blurrier. A common misunderstanding of spiritual work holds that awakening means becoming passive, accepting everything without reaction. This is suppression dressed in spiritual clothing. Genuine transmutation doesn't make you a doormat. It makes your boundaries sharper, more precise, more powerful. Anger at its core is a boundary-enforcing mechanism. The fire arises when something crosses a line that shouldn't be crossed. The problem was never the sensing of the violation. The problem was the unconscious reaction to the sensing. When you can transmute anger, you gain access to its information without being possessed by its reactivity. You can feel that a boundary has been violated. You can recognize clearly that action is needed. But you can take that action from clarity rather than from blind rage. The boundaries you set from transmuted anger are more effective. They're precise communications backed by authentic power that establish where the line is and what happens if it's crossed again. This is what the wrathful deities represent. Precise destruction of what needs to be destroyed, executed with complete clarity and no personal reactivity. It's consciousness maintaining the order that allows life to flourish. You're capable of this wrath. It's already in you every time anger rises. The question is whether you can hold it consciously enough to direct it, or whether it directs you. The ultimate recognition dissolves even the transmuter. Everything I've taught so far assumes that you who feels anger catches it, redirects it. This is necessary at the beginning. You can't skip to advanced recognition when the basics aren't established. First you learn to transmute, then you discover who's transmuting. At a certain point in sustained practice, the question arises naturally. Who is catching this energy? Who is directing this fire? Who is the one who knows anger has arisen? If you try to find that one, you won't succeed. You can find thoughts about a self. You can find sensations that seem like a self. You can find memories that construct a narrative of self. But the actual witness, the actual awareness in which all of this appears, you can't locate it as an object because it's not an object. It's what's looking. This is the final recognition that anger can deliver. The fire arises. The technique happens. The energy transmutes. And in the midst of all that activity, no one is doing it. There's just consciousness moving energy through form, directing itself through itself. God transmuting God. Divine power refining divine power. The fire teaching itself how to burn upward. It happens through doing the practice so many times that eventually, in some moment when fire is rising and being redirected, you look for the one who's doing it and find only openness, only presence, only consciousness aware of itself, playing at being a person who's transmuting anger. In that moment, anger becomes the teacher. The very force you once tried to control or eliminate becomes the doorway to recognizing what you are. Because everything is that doorway when seen clearly. But anger's intensity makes it a particularly effective teacher for those who are ready to work with it rather than against it. The fire in you is divine fire. It always has been, Every moment of rage you've ever felt, from your earliest tantrum to whatever anger arose this week, was God moving through you. Consciousness in the form of heat and pressure and fierce energy. You weren't being bad when you got angry. You weren't failing spiritually. You were experiencing the same force that powers the sun, compressed into human form, seeking expression through you. The only question was ever direction. Would that force burn outward, creating damage and karma? Would it burn inward, suppressed and toxic? Or would it burn upward, transmuted into clarity and power? Now you know the third option exists. Now you have the technology to use it. What you do with that technology is up to you. The fire will continue to arise as long as you have a body, as long as situations trigger the ancient patterns of defense and boundary enforcement. Each arising is an opportunity, fuel waiting to be directed, God appearing as heat in your belly, offering to teach you something about itself and yourself. The practices work. The mechanics are reliable. What's required is willingness to stop before reacting, to feel the fire fully, to redirect rather than release. 40 days of committed practice will shift something permanent. If you're willing to treat this as sacred work, to bring the same devotion to anger transmutation that you'd bring to any spiritual practice, transformation will happen. The fire is waiting. It's been waiting your whole life, every time anger rose, for you to learn how to use it. Tonight, you can begin. If this transmission landed, if you're seeing anger differently now than you did an hour ago, leave a comment describing what shifted. Your words help others who might be struggling with the same forces. And subscribe if you haven't already. We go deep into this territory regularly, and the next video might be exactly what you need to hear. The fire is God. You are the space where God burns. Learn to direct the flame, and you learn to direct consciousness itself. Let's continue.